I'm Jarrett Price with Alpine. Now watch this drive.
All right, let me ask you this. What is a music talent manager, coin dealer, an early stage software executive, and a private equity guy have in common?
They're hustlers and they like to grind.
Well, I would agree with that. I also was all of those things. As it relates to Alpine, it's really, we want to be the best place for remarkable people to build their careers.
It's actually not bad.
Looks pretty good.
I suffered some water damage in my house in Austin. And so we started really digging into the restoration industry. And so now we have a business called Guardian Restoration Partners. And it all started, with a blank sheet of paper and then lived experience in my case.
Your problem.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, well, first let me start by saying thank you for having me on.
Thanks for coming.
I think most people aspire to be on Joe Rogan's podcast, but for me, getting on Reese On The Road has been a dream come true. So just got to say thanks for that. But I'm Jarrett Price. I'm a principal with Alpine Investors. We're a San Francisco-based private equity firm. We also have offices in New York and Austin, Texas. We're founded in 2001. Today we have around 19 billion of assets under management. We're investing out of $4.5 billion fund. We invest in recurring revenue, software, and services businesses, oftentimes as the first institutional capital in. Average check size for us between 50 and 250 million per investment. We're big believers in the power of compounding, so we tend to hold our investments longer, on average 7 years or so. And a big differentiator for us, and something that's unique about sort of the way that we invest, is really our focus on talent. It's our fundamental belief that exceptional people drive exceptional business outcomes, so we invest heavily in talent as a primary mechanism for driving growth within our portfolio companies. So that's Alpine.
You mentioned people first. What does that really mean for y'all?
Yeah. Well, it means a few things. I mean, first and foremost, as it relates to how we invest, we put as much time and energy into underwriting leadership as we do the business and the market. We actually will go out and hire leaders before we even own businesses or even know what markets we're going to invest in. So on the one hand, that's how people first shows up. As it relates to Alpine, it's really the operating rhythm for everything that we do. We want to be the best place for remarkable people to build their careers. And so we invest in long-term development. We've been very intentional about building a culture of empowerment where folks can take on real meaningful responsibility early on in their careers. And so all this comes down to us treating Alpine as our most important investment, which it is. A key part of our strategy is talent. We always like to say we're in the talent business, we're not in the investing business. And it's really driven by the fundamental belief that exceptional talent drives exceptional outcomes. So, we invest heavily in talent. We have a full talent team at Alpine, 15 professionals that focus all their time on hiring and recruiting within our portfolio companies. We have a network of 20 consultants and executive coaches that work within our portfolio companies to drive engaged cultures. We have 100 leaders from our executive and residence programs operating within our portfolio companies today. So talent is a huge part of how we drive value within our investments.
Are they Alpine employees, or are they hired by the portfolio companies, or how are you kind of structuring that?
Yeah, so on staff at Alpine, we have a 15-person talent team.
Yeah.
Their job, just like our sourcing team's job, is to go out and find the next investment opportunity for the firm. Their job is to help us find the next great executive, the next great leader to run our portfolio companies. So we have a big team doing that. And then in terms of our executive and residence program, so we have kind of two flavors of that. We have a CEO and residence program. That's where we're partnering with a more experienced operator. These are guys that have typically been around the block before, have run companies before.
Right.
And we'll hire them in residence. We'll go find a business for them to go run, and it's usually a larger platform for us. And then Coupling that is what I like to refer to as our farm system for executive talent, which is our CEO and training program. So we go out to all the top tier MBA programs and recruit really high attribute folks that most likely haven't run companies before, but possess all the qualities that we believe make a great leader. We bring them in residence at Alpine, we train them, and then we place them into leadership positions within our companies.
Wow.
And so it's pretty unique.
Yeah, so it sounds like y'all's structure and approach is really people first.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it all starts with leadership in the team. So oftentimes we'll go out and we'll recruit operators even before we know what industry we want to invest in, and we'll build teams early, and then, in concert with our sourcing and thesis development team, go out and underwrite markets and start talking to companies. We talk to hundreds of companies oftentimes before we even make our first initial investment.
Behind an operator, though, that's been in the space before.
Not necessarily been in the space before, but a proven leader. So we have a really robust sourcing function at Alpine. North of 30 people now doing sourcing, and we cover multiple channels. So buy side, sell side, and direct outreach are sort of the three primary channels that we target. So we spend a time with all the banks up and down the size spectrum. We cover buy-side intermediaries, and then we also have a fairly large calling effort directly into companies, which is where a lot of the deals that we do end up getting sourced from. And we do a lot of deals. Last year we closed 190 acquisitions, if you can believe that. Yeah.
That's a combination of
175 before. Yeah, a lot of those are add-ons. We do a lot of buy and build strategies and services in particular, so we like to find big markets that are cycle resistant, that are fragmented, and go out and execute a high velocity M&A strategy.
When you're exploring new themes, like, how do y'all think about that? Or like, what's the research process involved?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say like we obviously start, with desktop research. The big thing for us is wanting to find, industries that are large, that are fragmented, that are recession resistant, with very high revenue quality characteristics. And then we go out and we start talking to companies. You can only do so much desktop research, but the real value for us really comes in getting out there and talking to businesses and understanding what makes them tick, understanding what pain points these operators are facing, and then trying to solve for that. So there's a lot of work that goes into that process. We go to a lot of conferences. We, work with a lot of third parties to help us understand new markets as well. But the biggest thing for us is actually going out there and talking to businesses. We've had, we've entered new markets as a result of having spent time on a deal process and learning about an industry that way. But it's also come through lived experience. And I'll give you a specific example, right? So a couple years back, I was part of a 4-person team that was charged with launching a new services platform for Alpine. And we started doing a bunch of different industry work, looking at a whole host of new markets. Weren't quite sure, which market we were going to go with. And then in the midst of all of that, I suffered some water damage in my house in Austin, and had to hire a mitigation company to come out and perform remediation work on my home. And through that lived experience, we started to, really identify a lot of the pain points that a lot of these operators were facing. We saw how mission critical of a service that this was. And so we started really digging into the restoration industry as a potential area for us to deploy capital. And as we went down that path, we quickly saw that there was a real opportunity for us to come in and build a really fantastic, enduring business. And so now we have a business called Guardian Restoration Partners. We partnered with 15 independent restoration companies across the country. And it all started, with a blank sheet of paper and then lived experience in my case.
Your problem.
Yeah, exactly. So
now, how do you find your way into the private equity world? It's a loaded question, but all right, let me ask you this. What is a music talent manager, coin dealer, an early stage software executive, and a private equity guy have in common?
They're hustlers and they like to grind.
Well, I would agree with that. I also was all of those things. So I have like the most non-traditional path I can think of to private equity. I actually got into the business when I was 29 years old. study finance at undergrad. I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder. I was a finance major, but I wanted to be a real estate developer coming out of college. I graduated at the time, however, where that wasn't really in the cards. December of 07, so this was like right when the GFC was happening. Real estate was really taking a dump. I had a really unique opportunity to work with my brother. He's a professional musician and a music producer and a songwriter.
Oh, really?
So right out of school, I went to go manage him. And
Where's he based out of?
He's in Los Angeles now.
Okay.
So right out of the gate, I took a shot at an entrepreneurial endeavor and gave that a good run. And then, over the course of, fits and starts and trying to make it in the music business, I eventually took on other jobs. I did work in the coin business. I like to say that's where I got my MBA. I worked for whom I refer to as the Michael Jordan of the coin business, a guy named Kevin Lipton out of Beverly Hills. Still a great mentor and friend of mine today. He really taught me a lot about business, most importantly, like how important relationships are to business, which has really been impactful for me in my career and something that I've taken to heart. And after 3.5 years or so of working with Kevin, I ended up first investing in and later going to work for an early stage enterprise software company. All that being said, by the time I was 29, I was itching for something that was a little bit more sustainable, something where I could see myself actually building a long-term career. I had a friend who worked in private equity at the time, and he sort of tipped me off to this role called business development, which I knew nothing about private equity, quite frankly, when I got into the business, but I did know that I was good at building relationships. I was a connector, I was a hustler, and so I think a lot of that skill set really lends itself well to a business development role in this industry. And so got my foot in the door. I started at the very bottom, and here we are today. So
Alpine the whole time?
No, I started at a firm called Platinum Equity out in Los Angeles. I spent 6 years there. And Platinum was, they were one of the early pioneers of the business development role in private equity. So I feel very fortunate to have been able to start my career at a firm like that. But spent 6 years there, was lucky enough to find Alpine, sort of a dream come true, quite frankly. And it's been a good run. I've been there 5 years now. We've raised 3 subsequent funds since I started. And the firm's gone from 30 people when I started to now 160 professionals across 3 offices. So we've really enjoyed some tremendous growth, and it's been really fun to be a part of it all. Somewhat like this, when I was younger, you tend to get trapped mentally into thinking that there is one particular path into a job. I'm a perfect example of how you can break that mold, right? I did not go into investment banking right out of undergrad. The traditional path that usually leads you to private equity is not one that I followed. And so first and foremost, like, if you want to do something, just know that it can be done. And if you're worried about sort of where you are currently, not studying finance in undergrad, maybe I didn't go to investment banking right out of college, like, none of that really matters. In fact, at Alpine, many of the people that are at Alpine today, in fact, the majority of them came to us as interns, most of whom haven't studied finance necessarily. We have a lot of people that were, poli-sci majors, that were engineering majors, liberal arts majors in college, came to us as interns and are now partners at our firm, believe it or not. And so, first and foremost is, hey, it can be done. 2, networking is a big part of moving up in the world, as you're aware.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I would just encourage young people to start networking. I mean, we have fantastic tools today that didn't necessarily exist when I was coming up, in the form of social media, etc. Like, it's very easy to reach out to somebody. So reach out to them, be intentional about why you're doing so, be respectful of their time. But I've never turned down an offer to connect from a young person that's expressing energy towards this role. So I just say put yourself out there.